Our woven top fitting series is back, and today we talk all about height adjustments, petite adjustments, taller length adjustments, and everything in between. It will be for everyone because even someone that has a standard height has their length distributed in different ways, and we are going to see all those variants. It will be super practical and will help you a lot with your fitting, so keep watching. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina from liftingpinsandneedles.com. Welcome to this channel that is all about sewing, limitless sewing, and today is all about fitting, and it's fitting in a way that maybe you're not accustomed to, or an approach that you might not have considered in the past. And this is all related to our height. Our height is one of the factors that can vary the most according to genetics, ethnicity, all sorts of factors that can influence how tall we end up being as adults. If we're sewing when we're teenagers or preteens, we're going through those changes as well, and I had to go through that. But as adult women, we sort of have a height that doesn't change much until later in life when, due to changes in our bodies, with aging, we do become shorter than what we were in our 30s, 40s, 50s. We might end up not measuring ourselves for decades because we knew what we measured when we stopped growing after our growth spurt. In my case, I reached this height at 13, I believe. When I was pregnant, I grew 3/8 of an inch extra. That's about it. I probably need to measure myself, you never know. But probably in your late 50s to 60s, you might notice that this height is a little bit less than what it used to be, and that's just very common, very normal, because our skeletal system changes as we age. So that is very much expected, lots of changes as well. It is a very good idea to know what we measure, but otherwise it might not be that important, because when we are trying to fit a top, we need to know this area of our body and what those distances are. Now, let me tell you something that might make you a little bit sad, or it might just give you a bit of truth. If you pick your size for a pattern of any brand based on your measurements, and you expect that pattern to fit right out of the envelope or the printer, whichever way you're using patterns, in paper patterns or PDF, you are in for a big disappointment, because patterns are drafted for standards. Basically, we choose our patterns based on our circumferences. Now, in the previous video of the fitting series, I showed you on myself extensively in detail how to measure ourselves, both our circumferences and our heights. So you might be more familiar with your circumferences than you are the heights of you, meaning what is your armhole depth, what is your bust height, what is your waist height, all those vertical measurements that are so important, because if those are off on a pattern, the fit will be off. And you're not basing your choice of sizes based on those height measurements. In fact, most patterns don't even give you them. There are some patterns out there that will give you detailed measurements of the back waist height. That's really helpful. Otherwise, you'll probably just find circumferences, and that is what you base yourself to pick a pattern. And you might be using one or more sizes to accommodate for your circumferences that are unique. You might have a different size at the shoulders, another one at the bust, another one at the waist, another one at the hips. You might blend between all of those so that you are sure that your body circumferences will match that pattern. So based on that, you choose your size and you make a pattern. But if you expect that to fit perfectly because you've done all the blending of sizes, you might be really disappointed. And especially if you're not the standard height that these patterns are drafted for. So most pattern companies will have a place where they tell you this has been drafted for a woman that is 5'4" or 5'5", 5'6". Some draft for tall women, 5'9". There are certain brands that do draft for taller women or shorter women. And I think it's a really nice piece of information that you should know before you tackle a pattern, because you might fall in love with a style. It's super pretty, very beautiful. You want to sew that pattern. It might not match your height to begin with, and all these other vertical measurements that need to match. These vertical measurements are the distance between your circumferences, So you have your upper bust, which is usually around the armhole depth. Then your full bust, what's the difference in that height there, between your full bust and your waist, between your shoulder and your bust. All these vertical measurements are not accounted for in these patterns, and there can be so many variants. And it's not only about your height, there are so many different ways that our bodies are unique. Some of us might have a pretty standard height, but we have a really long torso and we find ourselves making length adjustments to these areas of patterns because the waist just ends up being too high, or your armhole here might end up digging into your armpit because it's just too short for you. So you might be the same height that the pattern is drafted for, but your original body will have all these differences that are your height differences. That is what this video is completely dedicated to. I'm pretty sure it will change the way that you look at fit, the way that you look at a pattern before even cutting your muslin. I will be focusing on 4 different vertical measurements on our body. Basically, the shoulder to high bust, which is the armhole depth right here under the arm. The shoulder to bust height, I won't touch on that too much in this opportunity, but you will see it there. And then you have your shoulder to waist, front and back. Also, an important distance to see is from the waist to the hip. We also took that measurement in the previous video, and we will be seeing those measurements on a flat pattern and how that translates. For pattern drafting, a height of 5'4" and below, I believe, is considered petite. I've seen a different definition from 5'3" and below. So that in metric would be under 162 or 160 tall. Now, I talked about ethnicity before, and in Chile, where I'm from, the standard height of a woman is 5'4". So if you are walking around the street, that would be the average height of a woman. But you will find so many that are around the 4'9", 4'10", 4'11", so many. If you look at a general guideline that you will see everywhere, is that, for every inch of your height that is different to the one that the pattern is drafted for, whether it's less or more, you would adjust by ½ an inch. So in my case, if a pattern is drafted for 5'5" and I'm 5'8", there are 3 inches difference. I should adjust my pattern by 1½ inches, and those 1½ inches can be distributed in different areas. If I just blindly went ahead and just did that without thinking and without measuring or anything, it might not suit my body at all. So if you are petite, you have the same thing. You might, in theory, need to add 1½ inches to your pattern. And that might be okay, but where do you add it? Where in this area do you add it when there's so many variants? You could have a very short upper chest right here, and you might need your armhole to be much shorter than the pattern is. So that is an area where you might need to take away length right here. You might need to make your waist shorter, or you might need to make it longer. You might be petite, but have a really long torso. So there's so many variants where you can add or take away, above the bust. You might need to add or take away at the waist or above the waist or between the waist and the mid hip, depending on what that distance is. Same as if you're tall. I measure myself at 5'8", but actually I'm really short-waisted for my height in my proportions. So my bodice measurements are pretty standard. I think I measure the same that a woman that's 2 or 3 inches shorter than me would. So I rarely need to make adjustments to bodices. Rarely, sometimes I do need to add above the waist because I need my waist to be a little bit lower. Being taller, I might encounter a pattern out there where the armhole depth is super short on me and the arm is digging up and super uncomfortable. And I might need to add length up here on the upper chest and on the sleeve. I might need to add length above where the bust dart is, above the waist. There's so many areas, and you can know exactly where to add this if you just do some measurements on a pattern. You know your measurements, and then you can check the difference. I've created a little table for you, a downloadable table chart that you can print over and over again and have next to you when you're checking a pattern. So you can write exactly what your length measurements are, and then what you measure on the pattern and what is the difference and where you might need to adjust, either add or take away. So I think that will be super helpful for you. Again, head over to my website, the same link I used last time for you to get your body measurements chart. You can use that same link. Go inside the same page that is password protected. You already know the password is limitless sewing, because that is my motto. So go ahead and grab that. You can print that over and over again and use that as a guide for you to be able to really compare the lengths you find in patterns compared to your body, and where you can make the little changes that are so easy. It's just adding lines, spreading the paper or overlapping it and truing out the sides. Also, in some patterns, you will find just one shorten and lengthen line in a whole area, and that position where that shorten and lengthen line might match where you need it to be, or it might not. So feel free to add as many shorten and lengthen lines in the areas where you really need them, and you'll see all that in the practical segment of this video. But first, there is a very important measurement, the most important of them all, and we took it in the previous video on the series, and that was your neck width. So from the base of your neck right here to the other side, what is that width? What is this? You know, in my case, I know it's 16 centimeters, that is 6 1/4 inches. What is the half of that measurement? 8 centimeters, 3 1/8. So we are going to use this very special measurement to create a little template that's going to help us place that template underneath our pattern piece so we can know exactly where this point is, because most patterns start below, you know. So we'll see all that as well. So let's go ahead and have a look. This distance here is half of the neck width. I'll put a diagram here so you can see what I'm talking about. One of the measurements that we took from our bodies, from the base of the neck, from one side to the other. What is that half? And that is the distance there from the top to the bottom. And this is going to help us measure all the different heights that we want to measure on a pattern from that base of the neck. You know, most patterns don't reach the base of the neck. The neckline is slightly further away from there, a bit wider than that. But that is a reference point that you can't make a mistake on when you want to measure your armhole depth, your bust height, your waist height, all sorts of heights. So make yourself a little piece of paper like this that you can use to measure and compare to a pattern. I really want to show you up close how to use the template that you have. That's just on a long piece of paper. It's just a straight line. This is half of your neck width. We measured that. And so this is your center front here. Your neckline is lower, and you do need that clear reference point so you can measure from there down all the vertical height measurements we want to do. So just slide this behind until your line meets the center right there. It's just like extending the center front all the way up. And this is the width of our neck right there. But the shoulder seam always starts a little below the base, you know, it's not too close to the neck. That's why we need to mark our seam allowance right there. And we will just place that there, follow that slope, and where it hits the edge of the paper here, that is going to be the base of our neck. Now you see other dots marked on the paper, it's because I've been already using it, but just pretend those dots aren't there. This would be the base of your neck. This is where your neck would start, like this. And that's where we measured everything. All our heights, our bust heights, everything. That's why we need to know where it is in relation to this pattern, so we can measure from that dot down to there if we want to know the armhole depth, and then from there down if we want to measure the bust height, the waist height, all of that. And it's the same on the back. Here we have the back, only the difference with this one is that there is a 3/8 seam allowance on the center back. So the line that you see underneath, it needs to be 3/8 of an inch in. You can see there it's in. You put the ruler there on the slope, slide this down there until it reaches that mark that we've drawn on the center front. So you can see that the neck will start right there, the base of the neck, and that the shoulder is further away from there where your neckline starts. It's just wider. But we can be sure now to match from that dot down on the back. I like measuring here. The waist height on the back is very important for me, and also measuring the total length of the garment. So this is how you draw this. You can make several of these, maybe make one for each project, because you end up scribbling all over it and making dots all over the place. So it's very easy to draw. It's just a sheet of paper that has half the width of your neck there, and that you can use to compare and actually mark where the high shoulder point is, or the base of the neck. I want to show you a muslin I made on myself that I think fits correctly. Everything fits as it should. I'm going to show you after you see the fit how we can measure the pattern and how I know that pattern fits me, and where we can add all these lines, mark references, do all these measurements. We're going to see all of that in detail. Here we have a muslin where I think I have the better fit out of them all. The armhole depth is good for me. I can still move my sleeve front, forwards, and this is a woven design with a slimish sleeve. You know, it's not very voluminous. My fabric stretches absolutely nothing, But if I needed to drive, I would be able to drive. Nothing is pulling on my back terribly, nothing like that. I could lift my arms to grab things from shelves. If I get this elastic and measure my armhole depth from the base of the neck down, you can see it's very correct, it's very good, it's just exactly what it needs to be for my body. Now I have bust darts here. You can see a horizontal line that marks my bust height at my bust height, so they are correct. These are ugly darts, you know, this is a terrible type of fabric, but the bust darts are correct right there. There is the horizontal line marking my waist, and if I place this there, it's at the correct height for my body. And down below, at the fullest part of the pattern, I have the correct distance from the waist to the fullest part, the correct length as well. So I would say this is a top that fits me really well. So you can see that I've got the correct amount of ease at the bust. Nothing is pulling here on the top. I have the correct amount of ease at the waist. This is not a fitted design, you know, it does come in at the waist a little and then goes out at the hip, but not terribly. And I have everything correctly here. First thing is first, you do need to draw the most important seam allowances here, and that is the shoulder seam. I have my seam allowance drawn. The line is actually where the seam is going to be, and that's where you need to measure from. I've done the same here at the start of the side seam and here where the arm size starts curving up. Those are the ones I think are most important. I wouldn't go ahead and measure these because we are looking at this pattern on the assumption that the bust, the waist and hip circumference is correct for us, that we've chosen the size that is going to fit our circumferences. So I won't be doing flat pattern measurements that are horizontal. I will be doing vertical measurements because this session is about height and length adjustments, and all our measurements will be up and down basically. Okay, here is the template I have of half of my neck width right there, from the edge of this paper down to that line. I'm going to slide this underneath my pattern, meet the center with that line there, slide this up along that center front. Here you see that the shoulder starts a little further away from the base of the neck, which is normal. It is a little bit wider neckline, but if you follow the slope, this is where the base of the neckline would be, where I place the dot right there. And then from that dot over here, you would be correct, and this would be the base of your neck right there. It's just that the pattern starts a little further from there, and that dot right there is what you will use as a reference to measure all the vertical measurements you want to do. One of the things I would like to check is armhole depth. So it's right here at the intersection of those seam allowances. You know, this is where your sleeve is going to start. It's important that this is close to what your body is so that you could have a good sleeve fit and mobility. It's also going to affect the fit on the bust, the waist, if this is not correct. So I'm going to draw a line across this length right there. Make sure the squared area of the ruler meets the center and then goes across here. So this is one line that's perpendicular to your grain line mark, and I'm just going to mark it there in red. So that is what's on the pattern. Now the pattern will also have a notch on the side that marks where the waist is. I think I've never seen a pattern that does not have that reference point. Some patterns actually have a line across, but you will at least find a notch on the side. So I'll do the same. I'll find that notch, I'll square out my ruler to the center front and draw another line that's perpendicular to the grain line. You can see I'm going across the grain line here. Now another line you might want to mark that will not be on every pattern is where the hip is. So on this pattern I don't have that reference, but I can see where it's at the widest here. It's basically very close to the hem, it's just at the widest. So I'm going to choose a spot right there, almost at the hem. The length of this top hits the full hip basically, and I'll also draw a line across. Now these length measurements are the ones that we took on our body and that we can now translate onto a flat pattern. I'm going to be using my tape measure for this because it's what I use to measure my body. So I want to use the same tool to measure my pattern, not just a random ruler, because I did not measure my body with a ruler. So that dot that I have on the top there that marks the base of my neck that is further away from the edge of the neckline, that dot there is exactly where I'll measure down. So from the base of the neck, from that point there down to that line that I drew across here where the intersection of those seams are, this measures 21.5 centimeters, and that's 8¼ inches, and that is actually what my armhole depth is. I am usually taller than a lot of patterns, but not in this section of my body. I'm pretty standard, so it's very rare that I ever have to modify this area, but it might not be the case for you. If you are petite, you might find that your armhole depth is shorter here. If you're very tall, like 6 feet, you might find that you need more length here. You might want to consider making a line sort of at the half point of the armhole depth above the notch and make your length adjustment there to match this area of your body. The next measurement I want to check is my front waist height. So from the same reference point there, straight down to that line there, and mine measures 47, 18 and a half. It's actually 3/8 of an inch short for me from what my front waist measures. But because this is not a fitted bodice, it's not a style that finishes at my waist, that has a separate skirt piece or anything. It's a style that's more relaxed and loose. I wouldn't be that concerned about slashing a line. If you wanted to make adjustments of your waist height, I would make a shorten and lengthen line that is above the waist reference on the pattern, maybe an inch above that. Definitely in between your bust dart and the waist, make a line across, and that's where you would add or take away. But for 3/8 of an inch on a style that's loosely fitting like this, I wouldn't really mind it. Also because the style, you see, it hasn't got a really defined waist. It doesn't go in a lot and then come out a lot at the hips. So I'm not going to change that, although I could if I wanted to be very specific. I want to check the distance between the waist and the full hip, just because this can vary for a lot of people. This distance here is exactly what mine is, so that I know that at my full hip, this pattern is at the widest. Sometimes the distance between the waist and the full hip is shorter, meaning that you have a more pronounced curve here. And if you found that to be the case for you, you might find that at the mid-hip, the top is a little tight for you because it hasn't reached the full width that you need here at the mid-hip. Remember, the mid-hip measurement we took is half between the waist and the hip, around this area. So it would be a great idea to check what this measurement is, if it matches you or not. If you needed the full hip measurement to hit you higher, then I would add a shorten and lengthen line in between, hike this up so that the full hip measurement is at your full hip. So you can see that I've added the extra lines where I would put shorten and lengthen lines on the pattern. It doesn't mean that the pattern will have a shorten and lengthen line there. The pattern might just have one shorten and lengthen line here at the mid hip, or just at the full hip, or just at the waist, or just in this upper chest area. You could find lengthen and shorten lines anywhere on a pattern, but it doesn't mean that they are going to work for the adjustment that you need. So let's just have a play. I have cut this pattern into several pieces, but before I start playing with it, I'd like to show you something that is really important. If you think that you are going to need multiple length adjustments in different areas that might span the whole length of your pattern, I would suggest just extending that grain line mark all the way up to the top as much as you can, because you always want that to match when you're spreading apart your pieces. So I've just made my grain line mark go all the way up to the top. The first cut line I did here was on the upper chest, above the notch of the sleeve, around the middle of this armhole depth. And just depending, if you were taller and you needed more space, you would add here and you would spread apart, or you would overlap if you were petite and needed to make an adjustment, always keeping that grain line on top of each other right there. And then you would have distortion here in the front of the neckline and here on the armhole, but it's something that you could true up. When you do the adjustment that makes it longer, you will also have a little bit of distortion that you need to fix and true up. So you might need to make length adjustments in the upper chest, either make it shorter or longer according to your body. After making this adjustment, it might affect where your waist hits. It might make it longer or shorter. So after doing that adjustment, it might be good to measure, because you might need to compensate this waist placement and bring it up or lower it depending on what you need. If you are very short here in the upper body, in the upper chest, but you have more length down below, you have a long torso, your waist is long, you might need to add to the waist to compensate for what you took away here. So it's all very fun, if you cut your pattern up into all these places and then measure your lengths to match what you are. Make the armhole depth match you first, then measure again from there, see where your waist is and make that match, either lengthen or shorten. After you have all this section fixed from the shoulder to the waist, you can move over to the hip area the distance between the waist and the hip. The mid hip, see if you need more or less over there. Just spread it apart if you need more length. Overlap it if you need less length. You might need to add here and then overlap there. You know, you can have a lot of fun making these lengths match your body. The circumferences already match because you've already chosen your correct size. Or sizes if you needed to blend between a different size at the shoulder, at the bust, at the waist and the hips. You might be working with 3 or 4 sizes or 2 sizes or just one. But assuming that your circumferences work, you can make the lengths work as well, and it will make a huge difference to how this fits. This is the pattern that fits me correctly in my lengths, but this is the back piece. I have done the same reference marks that you would find on the front. The most important being the waist and the full hip. It is there for reference, and I have also done the lines that I would use as shorten and lengthen lines in the middle of the armhole there, around there, above the notches, a little above the waist reference if I need to correct the waist height, and then at the mid hip if I need to add or lengthen or overlap on that section. I measure down here to the waist height reference that I have there from the notch that is on the side seam, and for me it's exactly at my back waist height, 17¼ inches. So you'll find that this distance here is the same as the front. You know, these notches always match on the side seams, so I would say that that's the most important measurement to check. And also the finished length of your garment. So measure from the base of the neck all the way down to the bottom of the paper. Take away the seam allowance, and this top has a finished length of 26 inches. So it's really easy to know if you like your top to finish at that length. And if it's just a matter of preference and you want it to be shorter, you can use maybe this shorten and lengthen line to make it shorter, the one that's down here lower, so you don't affect your waist placement over here. So you do want your length adjustments to match in the front and the back. So if you're adding to a certain area in the front, you need to mimic that and add to the back as well. If you're adding above the waist, if you're adding around the mid hip area, if you're adding or taking away in this arm side area, they need to be symmetrical, they need to match in the front and the back. Well, I would be totally happy to take that pattern and sew this up in a nice fabric, finish a neckline properly. Whenever you're sewing a muslin, make sure to stay stitch that neckline. You know, if you're going to be trying it a few times, it might stretch out and make you think that you have a gaping neckline when you probably have just stretched out your fabric. So don't skip, stay stitching that neckline. I have sewn just one of the sleeves to show you actually where my arm is and everything nice and free. When a design has a sleeve, you always have a little bit of gaping here, and it's meant to be like that. You are meant to have that extra ease here so you can move. So don't try and get rid of all that little excess gape that you might have here, because once you have your sleeve on, it's perfectly fine. Drawing these lines across your muslin is really helpful. I have drawn those in yellow chalk. I hope you were able to see that on the video, and it's so helpful to see where your bust height is, where your waist height is, where your hip, so that everything matches in the length. All of these muslins match my circumference. They all fit my bust, waist and hips. That is not the issue here. What is the most important thing is that it matches where our body height is, which is the most important variant. So I hope seeing a well-fitting muslin helped you, and how we can check the pattern and measure and adjust. I attempted very hard to distort my pattern that fits well and recreate a fitting issue which maybe a shorter person might encounter. Petite person might find this armhole depth too long, and that will skew up so much of your fit. So let's see a muslin that does not fit correctly, where the armhole depth is too long, you know, my sleeve is hanging lower, just everything is off. Let's see that, and let's after that see how to correct it on the pattern. This is one that is just too long for me in this upper section. So one way you can tell is when you look here on the side, this is dangling too low. If I take my armhole depth measurement there, my armhole depth is higher than this. When your armhole depth is too long and this is too low, you have limited mobility. You try to move and the whole side seam goes up and you just feel super uncomfortable. Another thing that you might find on your feet, if this area of the armhole depth is too long for you, is that the area of the bust will be tight. And not because the pattern is wrong, it's just that the biggest area is hanging lower on you than it should. So you might find that across you have really tight pulling there. But if you would just hike this up like that, then it would be perfect. On clothes that I bought at the shops, Sometimes a shortcut way to do it is to take up the shoulder seams. But that's not a really nice way to do it when you're sewing at home. The best way is to correct the armhole here and correct the sleeve. But you can see when I hike this up, immediately I have more ease here at the bust. And when this is down lower, then it's like really tight right there. This is a scenario that would be common in petite women. For all of these muslins, we are not taking into account the fit of the dart. I've sewn it just as per the pattern here. And it is actually at my correct height there. But because I need to hike this up, it won't be correct afterwards. I have drawn a line across where the waist is on the pattern, where you have the notches on the side. And if I put this on, hope you can see the lines, but there is the mark of the waist and there is mine. It is higher. This is just too long for me, basically. I'm going to take away length here to make this armhole match my armhole depth. And I'm just going to pin across here, across the upper chest, above where you will find the notches. So if you took the route of measuring your pattern before doing a muslin, you would know exactly how much you would need to remove. But if you take the route of making the muslin just as it is and finding out what the differences are on the body as such, then you would need to pin away until this is better. I've got pins here. I've got 1/2 inch from that pin to the fold and from the fold to the pin. So I'm basically removing 1 inch from there. And that will bring this up. On this side that doesn't have the sleeve, you'll see that this will affect the sleeve. It will shorten the armhole. And you will do the same on the front and the back. I just can do it on the front here. So that means that you will need to change the sleeve. Now that I've pulled the armhole depth up, you can see that the waist reference on the pattern is actually at my waist now. What happened now though is that because I pulled this up, my darts are slightly higher, but that is very easily adjustable afterwards. The other thing that can happen before you hike this up is that your waist is at the smallest part of the pattern might be too low for you. And because it's a smaller circumference hitting you sort of at the high hip, you might find that it's tight right here and you don't understand why. If you chose your measurements correctly and the circumferences are fine, they should fit you, right? But it's sometimes because this smallest part is just hanging lower on the body, which is something I couldn't recreate with this, but I wanted to mention that. Okay, here we have a front and a back piece of this pattern that is too long for me in the upper chest area, where the arm side depth is just too long for me, where the sleeve was hanging low. Everything was fitting off because of that. I had pinned off about 1 inch of excess here on this upper chest area where I drew that green line above the notches of the sleeve around the middle section there. And I know I need to remove 1 inch, but had I measured the pattern beforehand, I would know exactly. This measures 9 1/4 inch, and I know that mine is 8 1/4 inch, so I know that this would have been 1 inch long had I measured the pattern before making that ill-fitting muslin. So you can take both approaches. You can take really detailed measurements like this and make the adjustment before you even cut the muslin, or you can make the pattern as is and then find on the body what the difference is, pin it out, and then correct the pattern. Either way, you are going to correct the pattern. So the time when you are going to do this just depends if you made a muslin just as is, knowing that it wasn't going to fit, or you made the correction first. You know, you still have to adjust. So I know I'm going to take away 1 inch from there. I have the line that I drew there, and I know I need to take 1 inch away. So I'm going to draw a line above this one that is 1 inch from there. The faint line is the line I just drew, and then I'm going to overlap. Now this is where I want to have another grain line mark that actually involves this section. So I'm going to draw another one parallel to the one that's already on the pattern. So I have 2 grain line marks right there. And now I'm going to take this, overlap it, just bring it down, make those lines meet, and put a few pieces of tape right there. And then you would do the exact same thing with the back. So here is the back. I'm going to draw a line 1 inch above that, or the amount that you need. You know, you might need to pinch out less. Yours might be 3/4 inch. Even 1/2 inch I think would make a difference, and I think it would be worth adjusting. Bring that line to meet that one. Make sure your grain line matches, make sure your center back matches right there. On this back armhole that we've just adjusted, you'll see there's a little distortion here on the side. It's not much, but you need to smooth that out. If you have a curved ruler, you can just find a nice curve that will match there, and then you can trim away right there. On the front, it's the same. Find the curve that will distort this the least possible. Now for the neckline, it's your preference. If you put a piece of paper behind here, you could choose to make this neckline less wide. So find the curve that matches here. And you could bring that neckline in and it will be slightly less wide than the original. Or if you want yours wider, you can just take this curve at the bottom here and get it to meet this one. The line just needs to be smooth between joining these. I would always have a preference for a wider neckline. I think they're prettier. So I'd rather take away than add more paper, and that would be the new neckline here for the shorter armhole. So that's corrected on both the front and the back armhole, the same amount. It's an inch. Now we need to look at the sleeve piece and take away the same amount from the sleeve cup, because you've obviously made this shorter. It's not that your sleeve is not going to fit the same anymore. Okay, this is a sleeve that matches the original pattern I'm working with, where I'm shortening the armhole on the top, and I'm going to make a line that's perpendicular to this grain line mark above the notches here. This is around the same area where I drew a line on the armhole, just above the notches, and I'll draw two lines. This is where I'm going to cut, and I'm going to draw the line above that. That is the amount that I want to take away. Now when you shorten a sleeve cup, it'll become flatter. It won't be so rounded on the top like this. It will just become flatter. You really need this grain line mark to extend almost up to the top, because you do need to match it. So on some patterns you'll find a really short arrow. If that's the case, just make it longer. Cut it there, overlap, make sure your grain line matches, and you're going to see a big distortion right there. It's just what's going to happen when you shorten a sleeve cut. Take your curved ruler, find the curve that matches what you have down here originally, and then just move it around until it matches what you have there. And look, you might end up eating up onto your notch marks, so mark them again there. Do the same at the front. Find the curve that matches there, then rotate it in so that it matches what you have up there, and go ahead and draw. And again, redraw that notch there, and then you can trim away. It will fit the shorter armhole that you have there, from the shoulder point there at the back and from the shoulder point here at the front. It's going to match. Okay, let's go back to the main pattern pieces. We've just adjusted the sleeve, and now let's double check how this armhole correction affected the waist height. You might find that you might need to add to the waist length or take away, or now that it's just right, now that you've shortened it. It just depends on the length of your body. This front waist height is correct for me after shortening it there. It was long when I tried it on originally without the correction up there. It was a bit longer on me here, but now it's fine. But on your body, you might find that the waist came up too high for you when you shortened it up there. Or if you're long-waisted, you might need to add length. So don't take it as a given that if you're petite, you are short-waisted as well. You might have a long torso and the pattern might just not match you. So just double check. It is really important to get a really good fit on that area of the garment. It makes a huge difference. But then always remember to check down below if the waist is going to be correct for you, if the hip is going to be correct for you. I am not going into depths about the bust height right here. This bust that might be higher or lower on you, you also can check that, and I have a video already about that. That's something that you can correct after doing these basic length adjustments that make the waist correct and armhole depth correct. You can play with the bust. This was the one that you just saw. It's the same as the others. It just has one sleeve. You know, you could take two approaches when you make muslins. You know, you could not measure your pattern at all and just choose it and sew it and then find all the fitting issues. Or you can take really good measurements of your pattern, adjust, and then make a muslin, and then maybe the tweaks you need to make to that muslin can be super minimal, and you end up wasting less time, making less muslins basically. So you can choose when you want to make your pattern adjustments, either by flat measuring or then finding it on the fit, pinching here, pinching wherever you need to get this waist and this hip to align to your body. Having an elastic around also helps to see where that is on the body as well. Remember, these vertical measurements don't need ease. They need to be pretty exact. Not like our circumferences. We do need ease there so we can move and breathe. But these lengths, they don't need vertical ease. You know, your distance between your shoulder and your bust is a distance. You don't need extra ease there. You know what I mean? So let's see what would happen in the inverse case. Maybe you're a taller woman, you're 6 foot, you're making a pattern that is drafted for a 5'5" woman, and you find the opposite happening. Everything is just short all over the place. This upper chest area is just way too short. Your sleeve is digging up, super uncomfortable. You can barely move. So this might happen to a taller woman or just someone that is a regular height but just has a longer area here. It could happen to anyone. So let's see in the inverse how that looks and how we can fix. Here I have another top in the same size. The circumference of the bust, waist and hips are supposed to fit me, and they do. Only this is the exact opposite. And this is what a woman that's taller than what the pattern is drafted for might encounter. If they have more length in the upper chest area, armhole depth is longer than what the pattern is drafted for. So look how uncomfortable this is. This is digging up my arm. It's very uncomfortable. It's horrific actually. Look here. It's just digging way up and it's not what you want. You can see that the bust height there, reference on the pattern, is above my bust. I get my trusty elastic to find my natural waist, and you see in this case that the waist reference on the pattern is higher than mine. So I might need to add length in 2 areas here. It just depends. So definitely I need to add more length here across the upper chest. That will include the sleeve, so that this armhole depth can actually be at my armhole depth and I can be more comfortable. Look, sleeves that come up higher give you more range of movement. You can see I can move my whole sleeve and it doesn't really affect the side seam at all. But this is extremely uncomfortable. This is just not right. It's just too short. And as a taller woman, this never happens to me because my torso is sort of short. It's pretty standard. You know, I have my length in other places of my body from the waist down, not from the waist up. So this is a problem I rarely encounter. But for someone that has a different height distribution, this might be something that you encounter. Just really tight here. You know, your waist will be way up. It's just too high. It'll be super loose and boxy because this actually starts widening and you have your full hip measurement on the blouse higher than yours is. So you might end up with a really boxy, undefined look there that doesn't look very good. It just does not look good. And the most important thing is how uncomfortable this is, especially on a woven. Because this bust height is higher than mine, I will have more circumference up here than what I need, because I need that extra fullness, not on my upper bust, I need it on my full bust. So you might have a lot of excess here and just more room than what you need, just more room in general from here down. We will have a look at a flat pattern and see how to adjust this, what to measure, what to look for. Here we have another pattern where the armhole depth was too short, where the sleeve was digging in, it was just extremely uncomfortable. This might be something that a taller woman would encounter with a pattern drafted for someone shorter, or anyone that just has a longer upper chest and just has a longer armhole depth. You know, we're very unique. So taking this there, measuring down, this is short and this is 7 1/4 inch. My comfortable armhole depth is a whole inch longer. So that just means I need to add length to this one. And it's just inverse to what we just did when we had to shorten. It's the exact same thing. I have the same references here along the pattern. And I've drawn a green line here across around the middle of the armhole depth above the notches. And I'll just cut these and add. I also don't have a grain line mark that matches the area of the body I'm going to modify. Just make sure it's actually parallel to the grain line the pattern has. And I'm going to draw one over here as well. So I'm just going to cut this. From the edge, I'm going to draw a line that's 1 inch longer right there. I'm going to draw that grain line as well there on this extra piece so it matches. Now I can take the piece I had cut away, put it on there, match the grain line. There's not much distortion here on the armhole on the side here at all, if any. But there is some distortion there on the neckline, and you just need to choose and smooth this out. That's what I've done. Now, if you're working with a pattern that is woven that has a facing, you would have completely skewed up the original facing, which means you are going to have to modify your facing to make it match what you have here now. And then that would be the modified front. Then at the back, do the same. I have the line across the same area above the notches. Place your extra at the bottom. Then that grain line mark through the extra paper as well. Make sure your grain line matches. Now the back is very clean. You don't need to do much of anything. There's no distortion there. But there is always a little bit here on the armhole, not much. Okay, so once that's adjusted, you can go ahead and measure some more. You know, that's going to be good. Measure some more if you need to correct your waist height. You might be able to correct the bust height and the waist height at the same time if you need extra length across this area anyway, even after lengthening that. And that might happen to someone with a longer torso or just a taller height. You could fix both in one. If you just made a line across between the armhole depth line or high bust and the full bust, you could do a line there, cut through there and then add there. So if you were taller or you had a longer torso and maybe with this placement there, maybe you needed your dart to come down 3/4 of an inch and also your waist was too short by the same amount, you could do all in one and just add right there. Add above the bust height and then you would sort out your bust and your waist placement. That is one thing you could do. You could also overlap here as well. So this is one way you can fix things in one go. If after doing that adjustment your waist height was perfect but your dart wasn't, you could just move the dart up and down. So you can have so much fun adding lines to where you need them. Potentially you could have one above the bust height, you could have one above the waist height, you can have one at the mid hip, you could have one actually at the full hip down below around here, and then add and then keep the bottom the same. You can do so many things. Just remember that if you did that to the front, you would also need to add the same line there at the back and make the same adjustment so that your side seams match and that your waist matches. Here we have a sleeve that corresponds to the pattern where the armhole depth was just too short for us. We have added length to both the front and the back arm side. So we need to add length to the sleeve, of course. I've drawn a horizontal line above the notches that is perpendicular to this grain line mark, and make sure that the grain line catches all this area. And then we'll just cut this, spread it apart and add. Now you end up with a longer sleeve cap that will match the longer armhole you just created. That is what is going to match your body. And then again, you need to clean this out here. And here we have the new sleeve. Now if we fold this at the shoulder mark, I just want to show you something. When we fold the sleeve, we can still see that the front armhole is shorter and deeper. It goes in down compared to the back, which is longer and smoother. You always want to keep those proportions when you play around with the lines of your sleeve. This should match from the shoulder down the front armhole and from there to there, including the appropriate ease that the sleeve might already have, where you need to do your gathering stitches there and ease part of this in. It should match the armhole. This is the muslin I created that had the short armhole depth, the short waist, just everything off. My own upper body measurements are not that different to what patterns are drafted for, even though I'm taller, because most of my height comes in the legs, in pants and skirts. That's where I really need to make lots of length adjustments. But I want to show you these scenarios. I wanted to sew these ill-fitting ones so you could see how it could fit, how it could look. Having these lengths wrong can really affect where your bust circumference is, and you know, you might have an area that's super tight up here or tight down lower. You know, you might find that mid-hip area on your body that's super tight because the length is just not correct. So many different things you can do, and you can just play with your pattern, cut it up into a billion pieces if you want to have a pattern that is going to match exactly where your heights are, and you're keeping your circumferences the same. These length adjustments don't affect your circumferences. You're not making the bust smaller or the waist smaller. You're not changing that at all. You're just adjusting your lengths to the pattern and making everything correct. It's not your body that is wrong, you know, it's the pattern. That the pattern was not drafted for you. So you can easily adjust that to fit you, and then you have a much better result. I did not discuss the topic of the bust height in depth in this video, although you did see some adjustments that could correct that, and the waist at the same time. But I'm leaving that for a separate video. I do have already a video on the channel showing you how you can lower or raise a bust dart once everything else is correct. If your waist height is correct, your upper body, your armhole depth is correct, and the only thing that's off is that placement of the dart, you can easily move that up and down. I will leave that video linked down below, and I actually will include it into this fitting series because I think it's a really important part of fitting, but that I didn't include in this one because it's not height as such, although it is, but it's just separate. In the next video about fitting, we will go up and do everything that's got to do with the bust, full bust adjustment, small bust adjustment. All you wanted to know about fitting the bust is coming next. Once we've got all these other measurements correct, we can go ahead and focus on the bust, and that's how we will progress. I really hope this helps you. I've done my best to show the information in a way that's super easy to see and to understand. So I really hope this does help. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye.